Mhm. Hi.
Hi.
So I'm doing this call today with my teacher, my mentor, and I consider a friend as well, Peter Woodbury. And Peter, how did you get started with regression hypnosis?
Um, well, that would go all the way back to like the trace. It's kind of my life story in a way. My parents were Catholics, and they were psychiatrists, and they were interested in metaphysics, kind of peripherally. And so later on in my life, I learned about this guy named Edgar Casey, and he talks about how you pick your parents, and he talks about astrology. So having learned over time these sort of things, like astrologically, I have Pluto on my ascendant, and Pluto is the influence, planetary influence, has to do with the underworld. So it would have to do with something like hypnosis, with kind of looking at the subconscious, and that's always been my interest, or one of my big interests, and it was seated in my family with my parents. And so that trinity, I would say, of being interested in spirituality and religion. I'm not really, I don't consider myself Catholic anymore, but then also being interested in the mind and in psychology. And you see, what was the other influence? And then the metaphysical. And so all those three kind of participate in who I eventually kind of found my way to become. And regression hypnosis has become kind of probably the major conduit that I use to try to help people kind of access the subconscious. And now I look at it, it's more than just the subconscious, it's really kind of their infinite self, or what some people would call the soul self. So kind of step by step, majoring in psychology in college, then becoming a social worker, becoming a counselor, and kind of seeing how in talk therapy it's really helpful, but people become very dependent on the therapist. And I started to see how through hypnosis and regression, people become more dependent on themselves. They start to establish a connection with themselves. It doesn't have to necessarily do with me. And so I branched from doing counseling into doing hypnosis and regression work, because I find that it sparks people to kind of a deeper meditation, a deeper connection with spirit, and then more meaning and purpose in their life.
Great. And so was there, majoring in psychology and then moving more towards this metaphysical work, was there proof that you needed as you went along, or proof provided to you?
That's a great question. It's like my great grandmother. She was 100 years old when I was born, and she, in modern language, she would be called a medium, and she would communicate with. We'd visit her, and she'd be in a room, and like deceased relatives would be there, and she'd be talking to them. And I was curious about that. My parents didn't tell me that she was crazy, or they didn't tell me it was bad. It was just curious about that. So I began to explore the psychic dimension, and it's like, I think it's not very well known how much scientific research has been done on the psychic dimension that has basically proven that things like telepathy exist, and precognition and retrocognition, that those are facts. The scientific community, which kind of science is supposed to be unbiased, the community has bias, and so a lot of these things they don't want to incorporate, because it goes out of the materialistic view that everything is in the five senses, that there's things that happen outside of it. So I kind of had the benefit of not being terribly rigid about what was acceptable or not acceptable. And I'd have to say, with my hypnosis work, and you've heard me say this, is that I look more on if it's helpful than if it's real, because I think the whole concept of reality is very, what is reality? Like when you're dreaming, is that not reality? But isn't dreaming its own reality? And then when you're awake, that's a kind of reality. And then if you believe in the soul, if after death or before birth, there's a kind of reality there. So I always say that reality is very consciousness based. And so that when people have a trance session, they're experiencing a type of reality, but that oftentimes has a deep impact on the waking state reality. And that's what I'm looking for. Is it helpful more than if it's real? Like
Right.
I think the litmus test of this, what we're right now, if we think of this as reality, it's very limiting, because the unseen and the subconscious is so much more vast than the consciousness. And to think that none of that stuff is real because we can't touch it or smell it or feel it, that's just, to me, is kind of ludicrous.
Right. So when I first told people that I was trained in doing this beautiful work,
Uh-huh.
immediately people think of, that stage hypnosis
Yes.
experience where half the stage is clucking like a chicken
Right.
and the other half is, pretending they're a newborn baby. And can you describe what the experience is like, actually?
Well, of course, that's the popular impression that people get from YouTube or from a cruise, that it's used as a stage performance. And then what I explain to people is that what you don't see oftentimes in a show is that, that hypnotizability is a range and it's a skill. And some people are highly hypnotizable, some people moderately, some are more difficult to hypnotize. But there's about, let's say, 5% of people that are pretty highly hypnotizable. And so what a stage hypnotist will do is, in front of 200 people, they'll give broad suggestions, light trance, and then they'll say, and your head's going to drop. And then you might be just like looking and going, oh, what the heck is this about? But if you look next to you, the person next to you might be like this. The stage hypnotist sees that and brings those people on stage, because those are the highly hypnotizable people. And then they proceed to do the show with that group. If you talk to people afterwards, oftentimes they were a little bit aware of what they were doing, but they felt like their inhibitions were gone. Like you've had a couple drinks and you're just more loose. And so that's sometimes the experience. Sometimes it's much more intense. And sometimes people have bad experiences with being brought up on stage and made to do things and then waking up. And so I'm not a fan of stage hypnosis, because it would be just like doing stage heart surgery or stage, something that has tremendous healing value that you're going to turn into a show. And so
Right.
people get turned off by it that way. But your question was about, how do I see it happening? Like, what's the reality of hypnosis and the work that we do? Well, it's between being awake and asleep, those in between states are called trance states. And between being awake and asleep, those trance states, the mind opens to suggestion. We become suggestible in those in between states. Some less and some more. And that's what the more hypnotizable people in those trance states are more amenable to suggestion. But that's the fancy word for hypnosis. It's the suggestibility of the mind that's achieved between wakefulness and sleep. So what you're trying to do in a session is just get a person into a mild trance state, like a meditative state, and then you begin to make suggestions. Another hurdle for people is that it involves the imagination. We tend to, the five senses being tends to think of the imagination as not real, that the imagination is child's play, and that there's reality and then there's imagination. But then you talk to geniuses like Tesla and Einstein and Casey, and man, it's all about the imagination is the bridge to the subconscious and into the soul realms. And so you're trying to prime the pump for people to have an imaginative experience. And at first it starts to feel like, oh, I'm not sure. But if they stick with it, oftentimes it'll become an experience. It'll become a story. And then there oftentimes are real feelings that get stirred up in that. What I look for in a session is, was it a feeling experience rather than a cognitive experience? Were they experiencing something rather than just observing something? And then, so that's the one, is that it's an experience, that there's feelings involved, and that it has an element that's spiritual. And by that I mean that consciousness is diffuse, that you're able to be in different places at once. So you're able to be, if it's a past life, you're able to be in the person that you identify with, but you can also identify with thoughts and feelings of somebody else that's there. And so you're you're sort of there, but you're sort of an observing presence. And then you can have experiences with guides that tends to be telepathic, so that it's emotional. It's an actual experience. You're not thinking about it. You're just kind of, oh my God, wow, this is what's going on here. It's blue. I'm getting pulled into something. So it's an experience, and then it's spiritual because you're not just locked into one identity. You have more of a diffuse identity. And then if that happens, the person will generally afterwards bring forth something that kind of changes them. They have they're a bit, some people go with the change, and some people aren't real comfortable with the change. Some people want to say, oh, I think I made that all up. That wasn't true. And that way they can reconstitute themselves the way they were before they had this experience. So, those are the ones that sometimes are painful for me to watch, to see someone who's had a tremendous experience and then just break it down.
Just to undo it all, right?
Yeah.
So when we do sessions, I find that the biggest role is to set up a safe environment, and then to ask what maybe the intention for the session is, and then to keep bringing them back to, their feelings. What is that, that experience? Because some folks, from what I've seen, is maybe they don't see a whole lot, but the feeling is so powerful that they can't even bring the words to describe it all.
Yes.
And so that brings me to my next question. If someone comes to you or another practitioner for a session, what are the different kinds of experiences that they might have? You mentioned, maybe a past life, maybe some time with their guides. What other are your favorite
possibilities?
Yeah.
Well, I've learned that if you do this work long enough, that you start to specialize. And by specialize, I mean that I don't know, guides, or there's something that starts to push your sessions towards something. So I would say that my specialty is introducing people, or people having contacts with their guides. But some other people might have a specialty in past lives. Some fewer people, but some also project people into future experiences. And then some people also are, the experiences are kind of mediumistic, where they contact deceased loved ones. Sometimes they're dream-like experiences, more symbolic. And sometimes it's kind of like, it seems like alien or other
outer space,
other systems of thought and belief and that sort of thing. Those aren't my specialty. I started off doing purely past life regression, and now it's a little bit of past life, but it's a lot of guides. And I think what's good with guides is that sometimes a past life memory, you still have to interpret it. You still have to figure out, why am I getting this? What relevance does it have today? So it's a little bit like a dream that you have to interpret. Whereas with the guides, it's much more direct. They're much more answer a question. They might answer it with symbols, or they might answer it with kind of with thoughts, but it tends to be more direct than there's less need to interpret with guides.
I also find it to be very gentle.
Like gentle
the most
and funny.
Gentle teacher. Yeah, it's so funny. I just thought it was my guides that were funny, because that's how they knew they could get to me. But do you see that a lot of other folks that come to you,
oh my God,
your guides they're hilarious, aren't they?
Yeah, and they don't care. Like one time they made a joke, and I was like, this woman had a really rough life, and she wanted to know why she picked her parents. And I said, oh, your dad was really good looking, and your mom was smart. And that's what you wanted to be, good looking and smart. And look at you. She was good looking and smart, but she had been traumatized by these people. So, she was like, are you kidding me? And they went, yeah, we're kidding. You picked them because you wanted to learn a lot. But it's like they broke the energy. Like it was a serious energy. And they made this total joke that got us disoriented. And then they gave the legitimate answer. Like they didn't want to answer in this context of it being so tense and so like, why I picked my parents. They said something silly.
Yeah. And I find that in my healing work that I do with myself, like the one-on-one stuff, the journaling, the reflection, and then even when I work with you and other healers, I use humor, because I think that's just an important part of the process.
Mm.
Where do you see humor it? How is it woven into the healing? Like, is it necessary for everybody? Is it something we should be embracing a little bit more?
Yes, I think humor is a state of consciousness. And so it's
Mm,
just like hopefulness is a state of consciousness. And so I just think that humor is. And I also think that, to have a sense of humor is a kind of intelligence, and it's also a kind of a spiritual attunement. And I think that to live through a life, like the Buddha said, life is suffering. There's
mhm.
lots of crap going on. And so to be able to tolerate this crap, a really important part of your spiritual immune system is humor. You have to be able to laugh at, when things are getting, it's like, look at our world, it's like, if we take this all seriously, in a way we have to laugh. We have to say, oh my God, what's next? The locusts? Because
Right,
we're kind of living
right,
through that kind of stuff. So it's like, I think humor is like fuel for your purpose and your mission, because it
right.
otherwise you can get too bogged down and things can get too heavy. And I think if you've ever, you meet people that don't have a sense of humor, and it really feels to me like they're handicapped, like they just
Right,
have their how they can survive life without humor becomes a question. It becomes a real
right.
challenge.
And I suppose I always thought of it as perhaps people might think that I'm not taking something seriously enough. But if my guides can have such an amazing sense of humor in literally guiding my soul when I ask for their help, then it sort of takes the judgment off of myself of saying like it's okay, it's all right, like I could still be this immensely caring person and
Right.
make a difference and do the hard work. In fact, it's almost necessary to go back in and do all that shadow work and to show up again.
Well, the guides don't really care what anybody thinks of them, and they don't really
Mm,
care what you think of them. Like, I mean, they exist in a realm of assurance. They're connected to the whole, and so when they're making jokes, they're all laughing. Like it's funny, and
just
so
funny. Yeah.
they're in that level of consciousness. And then, sometimes I thought of, like, if you're asking God, like, how come everything I've ever wanted in my life is taken away from me? Why is everything so elusive? And then you pray to God and you hear God laughing. And you're like, God, how are you laughing? This is my problem. And then if God says, well, this is what I see. It's like a cat chasing its tail. Everything that you're chasing, well, it's you that's running away, that's
Mm,
keeping it going. So if you see a cat chasing its tail, it looks funny. But maybe
mhm.
to the cat, it's like, I want that thing, and
Serious
it's
business.
elusive. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like they see things in that bigger view, and
Yeah.
it's funny to them. I just
Yeah.
think we're funny. Like, that because we plan so many things before we come in, and we're smart before we incarnate, and then we get here, we're like, what's going on? And they're like, we told you, why did you plan? You the one who chose this life, we warned you. You want it, and
Yeah.
then you have, because there's so much amnesia that comes into here, that they haven't forgotten stuff, whereas we have. And so there's a little bit of like, oh my God, these people, what's wrong with them? They're all chasing their own tails.
We are. So um one of the things I really love about this work is that you said you started off as a Catholic. Do you still consider yourself a Christian?
Yes, I would
Yeah,
say I'm kind of like a new age Christian, because
right,
I put, through Edgar Casey, I see Jesus now connected to a lot more than Christianity.
right,
That he had past lives and he was part of different traditions, and that what he tried to teach is kind of a combination religion. It has, you can see aspects of Zoroastrianism, you see aspects of
mm,
Egyptian mysticism in Jesus's teachings. It's way beyond um, Judaism. There's some Judaism in it, but much broader. So that's the kind of the Jesus that I've come to know and understand and work with. So it's not a, but I also feel like I don't ever want, and I don't think Jesus would want this, is that belief in Jesus or Christ to be exclusionary, that it's the
right,
best religion or that kind of thing, that it be something. Sometimes I think that all of these world leader religion types, they were running a relay race, and they had one lifetime to run the race as far as they could, and they handed off the baton to the next avatar. And so there's been these avatars, and then, Buddha handed it off to Jesus, and Buddha was focusing on compassion and meditation and detachment. And then Jesus said, okay, now we're ready for forgiveness and love to be part of it.
Right. And so I love that it's not, first of all, you don't have to believe in past lives to do this work. I didn't believe in it. I was curious. I found you through one of Edgar Casey's books, and I'm so grateful. And I was less interested in him and more interested in the process, that I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And so that's how I found you. And so the way that this unravels and unfolds is a better word, is so personalized. And that brings so much excitement to me, because again, they're not reliant on me or on you or the next practitioner. It is such a journey inward, and to hold space for someone as they do that beautiful work it's just, I don't know, it's just so powerful. And honestly, this is what the world needs right now, is this and more. What is one of your, if you could share one experience that you had in a session that was most powerful for you?
In doing my own work, or with other clients, or either?
Well, on your, like, your own experience of in a transient state.
Well, it's interesting because, hypnotizability is a skill, and it increases with practice. And so I've done so much hypnosis, I'm quite good at going into trance. And so now when I do sessions, they're not so much typical sessions. It's more like entering into an enlightened or illuminated state of understanding things, of getting guidance on questions and things. On my website, I published the transcript of a session that I had several years ago. And that's what it was really like. It was just helping me to understand certain aspects of being human. So it was very helpful. So I'm trying to think of I did one with the last intensive that I had, and it was really just helping the students incorporate what they were working through, what they were learning from past lives. So it was kind of like getting more like what you would call psychic.
Right. And that does seem to happen, especially if there's a good connection, that you'll receive messages for the practitioner, and it's kind of surprising and comforting at the same time.
Yeah, at first, I wouldn't share with clients, because the whole purpose of this work for me is to help people access this themselves, and not look to me or anybody else as an answer giver. But sometimes now I'll just say, they'll ask me, or I'll say, would you like to know some of what I got? And I'll share some, but it always as possibilities, not as anything definitive.
Right.
And, I always say maybe it means more to me than it means to you.
Right.
It's strange because I led a tour to Egypt in November. And when we did, it's the first tour that I've led myself. I've been co-leading tours for years to Egypt, but I got to really do my own thing. And so we did a reinitiation in the Great Pyramid. We got to be in the sarcophagus. And when I went last, I did my own. And it was so powerful. It really opened me up. And for about 3 or 4 months, I was so psychic. And it was like, I don't know, I didn't know if it was going to wear off, or it wasn't exactly comfortable. So it seems like it's kind of either worn off, or I haven't used that muscle so much anymore. Right. But it's interesting how much is available to us, if we seek that, and I think if you seek it to be helpful to other people, it comes through more strongly. But a practical session that I remember was, this was when I was learning at Brian Weiss's training at Omega. And I was practicing with a student, and she put me under trance, and I didn't have a goal. And I just remember being at a monastery in Ireland, and I hated it. And she asked me, well, how did you get here? And I saw myself being left for adoption as a 7-year-old boy. And then I looked over to see who my parents were, and it was my sister from this life. And it hit me right away. I said, oh my God, no wonder I've never trusted my sister, because she put me up for adoption. So this life I held that unconscious grudge. And pretty much right after, because I realized I was that non-local, I could feel her feelings where she was horrified.
Mhm.
I was the oldest. They thought I could survive. There wasn't enough food. It was Ireland. It was happening to kids all over the place. It was the church was telling the people to have kids and then taking some of them to become priests and nuns. So there's a little bit of a, so I'm still Catholic and still working out my feelings about Catholicism. But right away, I realized, it's weird to say I forgave my sister, because it wasn't even a process. It was like, oh my God, I'm holding on to something that is so
Right.
old. And it was like forgiveness was almost like a mistake. Like I didn't see the bigger picture. And
Right.
so that was really, because I had always kept my sister at arm's length, and I would have never looked at it in therapy, because I would never have thought it was
How
a
would you have
problem.
known?
Yeah. And then in this life, her husband in this life was my father then. And they replayed a very similar dynamic with her son from her first marriage. And they were split on it. Like it's almost like he wanted her to give her son up. But this time she didn't. This time she kept involved with her son. So she broke a
The
pattern.
cycle.
Yeah. So her son isn't going to feel the abandonment that I had felt. Because maybe at that time, she didn't want to give me up. Maybe she felt like, okay, let's try. We can make it. But he said, no, one of them's got to go. Pick one.
The other thing I find interesting is that healing with this work isn't just linear. It goes in all these different directions. And so you go back and you see, oh, that's why. And then there's something that drops. It isn't like, I forgive you, sister. It's just like, oh, click.
Right.
And it just drops away sometimes.
Yeah.
And then when you come back to this everyday reality, something shifts.
Yeah.
With just that experience. And
it's like, go ahead.
Well, and it doesn't even, I've had something similar with work with my family that I did, and I never told them about it. And there was a shift. And it didn't come from me. It's all of a sudden, it felt like a miracle to me. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah.
Well, the way I look at it is that, we're all born into chapter 317 of a novel, and it has 316 chapters, but before we were born. And so we have amnesia of the other chapters. So we don't know why our brother and our mother don't get along, but we get along great with our mother, and why our sister doesn't get along with our dad. But we do, it's like, it's hard to make sense of that. But then when you go and see chapters, 300 to 315, you start seeing like why all of these people have these feelings, and it starts to make sense. And then when you come back, it's like you're awakened. And so you can kind of realize like, oh, okay, I'm still holding a grudge against my sister, or whatever it is, whatever the dynamics are, that they become more clear. I think it's sort of like cheating on forgiveness, because it's so easy. But honestly, I have a brother who I just wish I could see a past life with him that would help me work through the grudge, resentment. But it's almost like it's not given to me. And it's almost like that relationship I have to work out on faith, rather than the easy answer of just saying, okay, in a past life, I was a real big jerk to him. And now it's reversed. And so I'm reaping what I've sown. And I can kind of assume that. But if I saw it, then I would go to my brother and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Well, because it's not about seeing it, it's about experiencing it. Like you have that experience of feeling it.
Yeah, and realizing how much that person got hurt.
Yeah, that intelligence just hits to the core, to the soul, when we talk about the soul. And I guess I question, I know that if we came into this every life, remembering everything, it would be so intense. And yet it would be so helpful, right? Couldn't we, and I've asked you this before, I'm like, what is the purpose of all of this? And, you said you got to figure it out for yourself. But do you ever think, what if your next life you come back and you're not as advanced spiritually? All this hard earned, work that you did, what if you don't come back with it?
Well, I think that each life is an evolution. So it's like, if I was to come back less evolved next life, it would have meant that maybe I didn't quite use the gifts and talents and resources that I had to its fullest. And then maybe I judged certain things as being easy when they're not quite easy. So I might go back to work that through again. It would be almost like a class that I have to retake. But I think that if you make the best of your life, if you make the best, I think we're all here to try to learn and grow, but also to help other people to kind of cooperate and act from a oneness, especially at this time. The more that we're in that vein and that spirit, it's a very successful life. Like I think that the way we spiritually measure success and the way that we physically measure success are very, very different.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So you do lead these beautiful trips. Where's your next trip?
I leave it was the day after tomorrow for Peru.
Nice. So I heard you say that you don't do the ayahuasca to reach these heightened states. You use
hypnoasca.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it about these locations like Egypt and Peru that draw you to them?
Well, Egypt, like, before there was past life regression, before people could do what we're doing, it's like, I think the original place of a regression of a soul, taking people out of the physical body into soul realms. That's one of the main purposes that the Great Pyramid was built. I mean, it has two portals from the main chamber, the chamber of the open tomb, and one points, it's 10 times of the year to Polaris and the other to Arcturus. And those are stargate or soul gates, where the soul leaves this realm of consciousness and then it comes back 3 years later. So the initiate would rest in the sarcophagus, leave their body for 3 days and come back and be like, whoa, man, it's unbelievable. And then they're awakened, they realize that they're not just a physical body. But I think, however long ago you believe that was built, whether it's 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, that structure was required for that. Now we can do that. I think now that a regression is like a 2-hour experience of what they used to do in the pyramid for 3 days. So we're taking people out of their physical consciousness into soul reality, and they're changed, they're initiated into the greater mysteries of life. But to go to the Great Pyramid and go into the sarcophagus and know that every great soul in history has been there, has gone through that, is tremendously powerful. And I think it's just an acceleration. And I call it reinitiating, because I think the people that go on these tours have already been initiated. They're just remembering that experience when they're there. So that's the highlight of Egypt, the experience. We rent it for 2 hours and we all go through the awakening, the initiation there. And then Peru, it's not like there's one central place. So it's kind of like there's temples and sacred sites in different places that we visit. And this trip we're going with a shaman who is going to lead us in Incan ceremony that connects us. And I think that the indigenous people, they remember the connection to spirit and to the earth. And so we follow him in these ceremonies. And then when we do the hypnoasca ceremony, which normally people would take ayahuasca, but we do it with hypnosis. And it's he chants and he plays the drums, and it's late at night. I think we're going to be there right around the full moon. It's just going to be this experience of people using that opportunity to go even deeper with their soul awakening work.
It is, I've heard people after a session say, like, I thought in order to see what I just saw, I would have had to take drugs. And it's very similar, because it is this change of consciousness, and it's pretty neat, pretty darn neat.
Oh yeah, some people got really mad at me when I tell them that, you can journey with hypnosis, that the receptors for the drugs are there within us anyway. So the drugs are turning those knobs, but we have those naturally within us. And the problem I have with ayahuasca, I did ayahuasca when I was 19. It was with my dad, of all things. He wanted to go do it. So I didn't have a very deep experience. I've had 100 times more deep experiences with regression. But what happens with ayahuasca is that a person takes it, and let's say it takes you to the 30th floor and it pushes you out. Some people are ready for that. Some people are ready for the 30th floor. For some people, that's terrifying. For some people, it's not even deep enough. Now, what hypnosis will do, if you're ready for the 30th floor, it'll take you there. If you're there ready for the 50th, it takes you there. But if you're ready for the second floor, it takes you there. So I find that hypnosis and regression is very soul oriented. It's going to take you, you're going to get just what you're ready to receive. Whereas ayahuasca is a little bit like one size fits all. And it's not so personally attuned to the individual.
Right, right.
And of course, it does take a little bit more work. You have to work at developing your abilities to go into trance and to trust the nature of the imagination and to follow that. So it's some people can have deep experiences right away, but a lot of people, they need to do it 3, 4, 5 times to start getting the spiritual neural pathway going.
Right, absolutely. Well, Peter, I so appreciate you taking the time.
Sure
And
thing.
I also appreciate the fact that you share your knowledge in many classes. And
Sure thing.
yeah, you're doing great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop the recording, or maybe I have, oh, here we are.